In 1930, the
Throughout the history of popular
Republican-controlled House
media,
of Representatives,
teachers have
in an
typically
effort
been
to
portrayed
alleviate
in
the
one of
effects
two ways.
the
The first shows the teacher as a tedious, oppressive force in the classroom.
passed
You see this in films like Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort.
In television shows like Charlie Brown, and in songs by rock bands like Pink Floyd.
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control.
Paulo Freire, an influential 20th century Brazilian educator, philosopher, and theorist of critical pedagogy, refers to the teacher-centered classroom in his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed as the banking concept of education. He argues that this approach, like the one employed by Dolores Umbridge in the Harry Potter series, is dehumanizing because of a teacher-student contradiction, which robs the learner of their ability to participate in a two-way dialogue and to be an active producer of knowledge. It creates a situation in which the teacher is active and the learner is passive.
Study hard and you will be rewarded. Fail to do so and the consequences may be severe.
This approach assumes that the teacher is the sole producer of knowledge in the classroom, and that the role of the student is to consume this knowledge. Additionally, the banking concept fails to engage students and make real-life applications.
Yes.
There's nothing in here about using defensive spells?
Using spells? Well, I can't imagine why you would need to use spells in my classroom.
We're not going to use magic.
You will be learning about defensive spells in a secure, risk-free way.
Well, what use is that? If we're going to be attacked, it won't be risk-free.
Students will raise their hands when they speak in my class. It is the view of the ministry that a theoretical knowledge will be sufficient to get you through your examinations, which, after all, is what school is all about.
And how...
Why do I stand up here?
However,
Anybody?
the other portrayal subverts the banking concept of education and shows the teacher as an inspirational facilitator of learning.
Look at things in a
You
different
see
way.
this conception of the teacher in films like Dead Poets Society.
See, the world looks very different from up here. You don't believe me? Come see for yourselves. Come on. Come on. Just when you think you know something, you have to look at it in another way. Even though it may seem silly or wrong, you must try.
In TV shows like The Magic School Bus,
Everyone, please let this be a normal field trip. With a friend? No way!
Cruising on down Main Street, you're relaxed and feeling good. Next thing that you know, you see it.
and in countless other films and TV shows that follow the conventions of what I like to call the inspirational teacher genre.
Excuse for why you can't make it. You made it to your junior year. Think about how you did that.
What is history?
Opposites.
You can read the board. So happy to hear that. No, what is it? What does it mean? Stace.
Change.
What is it
Thank you,
about the
Stacey.
inspirational
I'm
teacher
glad there's
genre
someone
that
paying
appeals to
attention.
audiences?
History is the study of change over time.
Perhaps it has something to do with the way these fictional teachers bring constructivist learning practices into the classroom.
We don't read and write.
These teachers inspire audiences by challenging traditional conceptions of the role of the teacher,
Members of the human race.
by finding creative ways to increase student involvement,
Passion.
and by making real-life applications to student learning.
These are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty,
So how do we apply these ideas to teaching in the real world?
I think the role of a teacher in the classroom is more of a mediator, someone that helps control the group, sets limits, boundaries for the students, but who also provides scaffolding for the students.
I believe that my role in the classroom is to create student-centered, engaged activities that will help students build on comprehension levels. I also believe that it's important to facilitate learning so that students are capable of doing tasks that involve previous knowledge from beforehand.
In the book, Broadening the Lens of Literacy in the Content Areas, one of the roles that the book talks about is that teachers are models. They are models of appropriate behaviors, actions, and also of literacy practices, which goes back to that idea of teachers trying to improve the literacy skills of their students through various activities and opportunities. And that's a very important role for a teacher, and it has great implications. It impacts how a student learns and also their motivations for learning.
There's multiple roles a teacher has. A teacher has to be a disciplinarian, has to be a mother, father, a psychologist, a sociologist, and most of all a teacher. There's many facets to being a teacher, and you have to kind of understand the students, sometimes their home life, sometimes what goes through their little minds at times, and how to deal with students every day. I think that it's a vast role, and sometimes you have to figure out what you need to be at what time of the day and how it needs to work.
In the book Right to Literacy in Secondary Schools, the authors talk about the teacher as a community builder. They try to create a positive classroom environment where the students feel comfortable, which allows them to feel the need to share and participate in the class, which then leads to them becoming more involved in their class.
I believe that the role of the teacher in the classroom, whether it be in the social sciences or in any other discipline, is to, number one, create an environment that encourages learning and exploration and creativity and critical thinking, and also to facilitate the growth of relationships and the seeking of knowledge and explanations to the world that students see around them.
In the clinical file that I did for a class at El Paso Gridley High School, I gave them a survey asking for good qualities of teachers, and some of the remarks that I got were that teachers were relatable to students, they listened to students, they explained material thoroughly to aid in the students' understanding, and they also interacted with students about more than just the subject, things outside, either outside the school or just outside that subject. And so I connected that with the idea of the teacher not just being the teacher, but being there for the students, being that other adult that students could come talk to when they need to. I also looked at the school statement, and part of their statement said connecting to our students. And so I thought that that was connectable to the teachers relating and also using real-life connections to involve their students. Another aspect that I surveyed were activities that the students liked, and some of the activities they liked were role-play activities, projects, and group activities. And I thought that some of those activities could really be well incorporated in a history class, such as reenacting battles, role-playing debates, or doing projects where they can pick a topic and go explore it. In a teacher interview I did with my mentor teacher, he told me that students were really more motivated and interested in something when they were allowed the opportunity to pick a topic of interest. And so I connected that to inquiry-based or problem-based learning because students have that choice and they can explore that further. and be more engaged with the material.
I think the role of the teacher in the classroom is to be more of a guide rather than like the be-all, end-all voice of the learning that's taking place.
In the book Dynamics of Effective Secondary Teaching, one of the roles that they talked about was a teacher as a decision maker. Teachers make numerous decisions each day, each class period. Another role was that of the researcher. A teacher researches not only about pedagogy, but effective methods, strategies, practices that they can use to reach and engage all kinds of learners. Another role is that teacher scaffolds learning. By scaffolding learning, a teacher helps to make the students think more in depth about topics, and they also help to make students think critically while also being able to better problem solve. And another role in Dynamics of Effective Secondary Teaching is the teacher as a disciplinarian who, through effective disciplinary techniques such as prevention, management, intervention, and remediation, can help to maintain a positive classroom environment.
I personally believe that the teacher is someone in the classroom who helps guide the students. I believe that a classroom should be set up in a way that it's student-centered rather than teacher-centered, because that helps keep the students engaged in like the material, and like they kind of approach it in a way that's the most exciting for them, rather than having the teacher being like, well, this is what we're doing and I'm going to lecture you and this is the information that you should gain by the end of this class period. It's having students explore the content on their own in ways that are like most appealing to them.
Teachers can also help to guide the process of inquiry, the collaboration that goes on between students, and also the critical thinking that students do. Another role that teachers have that the book talks about is teachers being advocates for student literacy. And so teachers create opportunities and go over strategies that help students improve their literacy skills. And that helps to support their reading, their writing, their comprehension, and other sorts of skills. And this helps students to become more independent and also more accountable for their work.
I think students are like explorers in a way, because they're learning all this new material, and like it's really interesting to see like how they use it and where they're gonna go with it, and that's why I think that teachers should be giving these activities that like the one I described, rather than just giving them like worksheets or handouts that they do on a daily basis, because that's not really helpful to them in like their development, because that's like not information that they would really remember. It's just something that they're doing to like pass the time.
Some ways that I particularly enjoy getting students involved in the classroom is having students create projects that you can place around and decorate in the classroom, especially projects and literary devices that will help students build on their writing and reading skills.
How do you connect your content areas to lives of students? How do you make real-life applications in your content area? What are some ways involved to get students involved in your content area? They're all the same. And some ways to do that with earth and space science education, it's kind of easy since my content area is all around us. So I like to think that you could go outside the classroom and take soil samples from different parts of campus, or even do like a field trip to a forest preserve or something, and discuss the different things going on in that, or go test the stream flow running behind the school and have the students doing actual real science and kind of designing their own experiments. I think that's a good way to go about things.
At my site school, which is Fisher, my mentor teacher and I have done a lot of activities where we give students like choices. Recently, we just created an activity where they read like a bunch of like fables, like the tortoise and the hare and stuff like that. And because we were doing like a unit on oral tradition and like readings like that. And one of the final projects that they got to do was retell one of the fables in their own way. So they could either write like a comic strip or like a children's story or their own play. And it was just really interesting to see how the students reacted to that, because they had a lot of fun with it, and like you could tell they really enjoyed that lesson, or not the lesson, like the activities that they were doing. And rather than just giving them like a test on like the vocab that they learned or like the elements that are like in a fable, like students were able to like take the like what they learned from each fable. Like our activity had like certain characteristics of fables that like needed to be there. Like they still needed to use like animals, and there still had to be like a moral, but the way that they were able to approach the activity was through their own choice. So that was really interesting. So I believe teachers should be creating like activities that help students learn, but learn in a way that like will be memorable and like meaningful to them.
Another example of student involvement is publishing student writing. Getting students to write and know that they're going to have an audience that isn't just their teacher is something that also motivates them in many different kinds of ways. And putting writing on bulletin boards or displaying them outside the classroom also gets them more motivated.
Well, for my curriculum, we have, like I said, a lot of it is teaching the correct behavior in social settings and stuff like that. And there's also functional academics, so like teaching counting money and stuff like that. And I usually will always instruct or get them involved through like a YouTube video, or I'll bring in a lot of materials that they can touch, like a lot of manipulatives.
I think that something that I will definitely do in my classroom, something that I've seen successfully done in social sciences classrooms as well as in other disciplines, is to put a big emphasis on discussion within class. It's not all about PowerPoints and teaching. Yes, the teacher does have a lot to give, information-wise, but the students need to be able to take what the teacher has to give and do something with it and make something out of it.
I would say, for example, picking material that is relevant to their age group. For example, you can read a story about the civil rights, but have the story be through the point of view of maybe a 10-year-old child, the age of the person that you're relating it to. Ask the students how would they react to a situation like that. Have them relate it to their own lives.
Something that I would like to do is bring in current events such as Hurricane Sandy. Use that as just a hitting point, because the students can relate to that, and it'll provide relationships to show that science is happening. It's not just something that you study out of a textbook in school, but it's actually an ongoing application that is useful in people's everyday lives.
Real-life connections are important in learning. Students need to be able to see the relevance and the applicability of what they're learning. In classes that I've observed, the students really wanted to learn because they could see the relevance of what they were learning and they could see how it applied to their lives. They made those connections. An example in a history class of how you can make those connections are, say, comparing and contrasting past elections with the more recent election. You could even look at economic policies over time. You could look at social changes and those implications. Real-life connections makes information meaningful to students, and they can construct meanings from what they're learning.
According to the textbook Dynamics of Effective Secondary Teaching, inquiry is a generic term that applies to methods with which teachers engage students' critical thinking skills to analyze and solve problems in a systematic fashion. The authors continue to explain that theorists believe that students should no longer be relegated to the role of passively receiving information, but rather the teachers should encourage them to mediate it actively by relating it to what they know and developing and applying it in meaningful ways. Inquiry, or problem solving, is being advocated by educators as one approach to help students achieve the goal of subject matter understanding.
Inquiry-based learning is a process that expects students to find information for themselves rather than learning through telling and retelling.
For that question, I wanted to quote this article that we read for our text apprenticeship. As you can see, it's filled with notes from when we did that. But the specific quote that I wanted to read is in the conclusion. It's on like the last page. And it says, through inquiry, the classroom can become a vital and engaging intellectual community that requires all of its members. It requires student voices for planning, for teaching, for working through, negotiating, and representing what is learned. Those of us engaged in teaching through this kind of inquiry know the joy with which students undertake work that is meaningful to them. Work that explores and expresses identity and possible selves. Work that displays growing competence and actual accomplishment. So that was just, I thought, a really good quote to summarize what I thought inquiry-based learning was and like how teachers can go about using it in their classroom. One way that I can connect it to my content area is next semester. I know my mentor teacher and I, or possibly just me, I don't really know yet, there'll be a unit on like a personal narrative and they write like their own memoir. And my mentor teacher was telling me how last semester she like gave them their guidelines or whatever, like what they had to include and like page length and stuff like that, you know, like just the basics of what they were doing. And when she was describing this unit to me, she was telling me how students were just going above and beyond, like writing like these 15 to 20 page memoirs because they were so involved in what they were writing. They were writing about themselves, but at the same time, like they were still learning about the writing process. They were learning about grammar and fluency and flow and all that good stuff that goes with writing. So, I mean, it was still a writing unit and like all that important stuff that you would do in any English class, but they weren't even really like thinking about it like that because they were writing like this paper that was so exciting for them and they were just so involved in what they were doing. And that's just one way I think you can connect it to English, although there are like numerous ways that you can connect like writing and reading and to students' lives and keeping them engaged. So far that's what I've learned about inquiry-based learning, and we'll see what else we can do with it.
The entire point of FCS is to relate it to real-life situations. Through the content areas of child development, food and nutrition, interior living environments, apparel design, adult living, it involves students in hands-on situations and it will give them the most benefit throughout my course. For example, you aren't going to give your students a worksheet about labeling utensils in the kitchen. You're going to make them get up, go find where they are, and involve them in this type of situation. In a living environments class, you're not going to give a PowerPoint on proportion, balance, symmetry. You're going to give them a blank worksheet and a pencil and say, here, tell me what you think this is. And have them draw and create what they think it is. It's your role as a teacher to facilitate the type of living environment that you want your students to be in. You need to give them the space that they need to be able to involve themselves into the curriculum as well as be able to relate it to their own lives.
For problem-based learning, in science, it's very applicable in the sense that you can give students a real problem, and then instead of giving them a typical cookie-cutter lab of do these steps and come to this conclusion, if you can just pose a problem and let the students figure out the steps to take, and obviously as a teacher you're guiding them and helping them, but you really want the emphasis to be on the students figuring out the ways to solve this problem.
The poem When I Heard the Learned Astronomer by Walt Whitman functions as a good metaphor for inquiry-based learning.
When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and the diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured, with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. Yes, I am a nerd. Bravo. Thank you.
In this poem, the speaker describes his discontent with traditional forms of education, which leads him to wander outside of the classroom to explore astronomy and the world of nature on his own. This relates to inquiry-based learning because, in this approach, learning is not confined to the classroom. Instead, students are encouraged to explore and to find answers for themselves.
Here is a diagram that describes the way in which students learn best. The percentage represents the amount of information you remember after you complete the activity. This is your average retention rate. Notice how you only remember 5% of the information if you are given a lecture. What's the easiest thing to prepare when teaching high school or college classes? Lecture. That's the majority of what teachers are using these days. This is not an effective way because you are not involving the students in anything that they are doing. Reading is listed at 10%. Although this is better than lecture, it's hardly an involved activity. Many students have issues with connecting the reading to their real-life situations. It's up to the role of the teacher to help connect the material with the learning. Audiovisual, 20%. This may include PowerPoints and videos. This could be a good supplement to your lesson, but if you're only relying on this, then you will only remember 1 out of 5 pieces of information. Demonstration, 30%. Demonstrations are a great way of teaching in a family and consumer sciences type setting. It is important to not do this for over 10 minutes because you will slowly lose the focus and control of your classroom. Discussion group, 50%. This is a great way to get students involved in your classroom and get them to share different ideas from the different experiences that each of them has had. A little bit of facilitating from the teacher will make discussion groups a very successful teaching strategy. Practice by doing, 75%. There's nothing that will prepare you more for a skill than to practice it on your own. Doing things without any help from notes or peers will help you achieve the highest possible skill you need. And finally, teaching others, 90% of the information. This is the most successful way to retain information. Being responsible for the learning of others is one way to be more involved with the material. Being able to find multiple outlets to teach the material to the various diverse learners will help you understand the material to the highest potential.
What I've learned from this process is really what inquiry-based learning is. It's about identifying problems and then trying to find solutions through research and exploration. Students get info from their questioning and the exploration that follows. Another thing I've learned is the interconnectivity between student involvement, real-life connections, and teacher roles. If a teacher acts as a facilitator or a guider, then they can help to produce a student-centered environment, and that can help to improve or increase student involvement. And if they use real-life connections, that makes the material more relevant to the students, and then they might be more motivated and involved in their own learning. Another thing I've learned is just that teachers have even more roles than I imagined. I knew that they had quite a few roles, but I learned even more about what some of those are. I've also learned about instituting inquiry-based learning and how it really shifts the focus on the students. Learning becomes more student-centered than teacher-centered. And with that focus comes this idea of, okay, how do students learn? How can effective practices be made to help students explore and be more engaged in the content? And there's a focus on making students more independent learners as well. And this has really made me think about how I can implement more inquiry-based approaches into my teaching. Some of the implications for teaching and learning are that more student-centered classroom. And also there's more exploration, and with that comes more motivation because the students have more choice, they have some more options there. It's also learning through inquiry, problem solving, and exploration, and it helps to improve their problem solving skills as well. And a big portion of this is that students get to construct meanings out of what they learn, and so that makes it more relevant and more motivating for them as well. It takes time to implement inquiry-based approaches, but it's a very worthwhile and beneficial thing as it helps to, like I said before, improve their problem-solving skills and many other skills along the way. Some ways that this can be applied into a history or any kind of social science classroom. Well, let's think. There's different ways. In a sociology classroom, for example, the students could learn about socioeconomic status and think about how that affects certain issues. How does that impact them? How does that impact other people? They could also look at the cyclical nature of poverty and why that is. Why does it keep occurring? In a geography classroom, students can choose a country, so they have that choice. They have a little bit more of a motivation because they get to choose that. And they can research about that country, about their people, about languages, customs, and with that they can also research the problems of that country and try to develop some solutions for those problems. In a history class, they can be presented with some sort of historical dilemma. For example, was the Civil War inevitable? And try to justify their reasoning through research and solutions. Another thing they can do in a history class is to do a sort of mock debate or a mock trial. And that would be another good way to engage them in inquiry-based learning. Another thing they can do, and this is looking at social sciences broadly, is doing a service learning project. And what that allows them to do is to really get more involved in their community by identifying problems in the community and to try to come up with some solutions to those problems, and therefore becoming more aware of the community problems and also trying to really lend a hand.
In the process of doing this project, some of the new questions that arose were, how does the classroom layout influence teacher and student roles? What kind of layout lends best to the inquiry approach? And what is the best way to introduce inquiry learning to students? Inquiry-based learning is one way to challenge the banking concept of education, to encourage active learning in the classroom, to encourage increase student involvement, and to make real-life applications. In a world where life and art tend to imitate each other, maybe we can learn something about our own teaching from the inspirational teacher genre.